evolved over the past 30 years. And I'm not going to cover like a very basic concept, very basic backgrounds, like in which year what happened, but a motivation for the machine learning that is currently in practice and deep learning. And application based mechanisms, because machine learning and deep learning are a very vast, broad category of methods. So the methods they include are based on the applications. So they are tailored for different applications. And the last thing is the overview of tools for machine learning and deep learning. So basically, artificial intelligence is making the computer to do something intelligently. For example, humans have a visual intelligence system in their eyes that is called visual cortex. So when the human sees an object, it reasons about it and then recognizes it. For example, if I see a bottle, I can see it has a sorry, I think someone's trying to join. So if I see a bottle, I can see, okay, it has this shape and it has this sort of length and width and this sort of curve. And I can, my visual cortex system does it very elegantly and sophisticatedly. It's very effortless. I don't have to put a lot of effort to do that. And the same thing, the same capability we want to embed in the computer systems that it does this job effortlessly. So the human learns this by knowledge and experience, and we are trying to do it. We are trying to make the computer do the same thing. And the very basic example is recognizing an object. So, for example, this is a shape, a blue cup. So, as I spoke previously, the human recognizes it through his visual cortex system because our visual cortex system it has a hierarchy of sort of structure. For example, very low level operations that are being happening in our eyes, they detect the curves, they detect the edges, and then the information goes to the high level hierarchy and then so on. But since we are trained from our childhood, so it is almost effortless. So evolution of artificial intelligence in 1970s and 1980s, the popular methods were knowledge-based systems, and these knowledge-based you can call like knowledge-based AI, and these systems used rules to sort of make any decision. For example, if I want to detect some shape or detect some object, I sort of hardwire or code something in computer and tell it, okay, if this shape is like this, then this, and if this shape is like this, then this. And I have a scenario. Although knowledge-based AI is not used now because of the reason that I'm going to discuss later, but just for the moment, just imagine a scenario where the doctor uses an intelligence system that has been built on rule based machine learning to diagnose the disease of the patient. So, what the doctor does is he describes his knowledge of disease diagnosis and he asks some computer scientist, and the computer scientist takes this knowledge and writes the program that encodes this knowledge and make decisions based on this knowledge. So, for example, we have you can consider a COVID-19 detection through knowledge-based AI system. So, what is actually this detection system is, for example, you take the symptom of the patient and, for example, his fever, whether he has some digestion issues, whether he has cold, or whether he has problem in the other organs, and you input it to the mapping function and you get the output. By mapping function, I mean is that all the inputs, for example, if the patient has fever that is very high, if he has got some digestion issues, you note those things down and then you write some if else statement. Like if he has fever A, and then if he has flu. So you can imagine if you are building an intelligent system based on knowledge based approaches, it is going to be very hectic because you have to write a lot of statements. And then another thing you can see from this example, that actually computer is not learning anything. It's just relying on the knowledge that the human is feeding to it. That okay, if this happens, then do this. If this happens, then do this. He is not itself. You can not call it as intelligent. So number two example is if you have like two objects given to you and you want to detect whether it's a cup or whether it's a bottle, you simply take their lens and then you write hardwire a code in the computer and tell it, okay, if the length of the cup is this, then you have to make this decision. Otherwise, you have to make this decision. And the example three is image captioning. Image captioning is a very popular example that is used in different applications. This task is used in different applications, for example, surveillance. So it includes, for example, if you are seeing an image, you don't just recognize the object. You can tell, okay, what is happening in this image. It's sort of a scene interpretation, you can say. So um, you can think of, for example, if if someone asks me to write to write a program using knowledge based AI approach to make the computer make a decision what is happening in the image, it will be very difficult for me because I have to write a lot of if else statements. I have to take in account a lot of parameters, like um, if the guy is above the sea, then do surfing, and like there are a lot of things that I have to take care of myself. So these are all the disadvantages of knowledge-based AI systems. They rely on completely on the knowledge that is given to them. They are not intelligent themselves. So as I discussed before, the problems with knowledge-based AI, the mapping function, you actually you don't cannot call it a function because it's it's simply taking the input and according to the if else statements it's giving the output. So it's a basically a very linear sort of thing. So it's not learning something on its own. And the issue with the AI algorithms that are based on hardwired knowledge, we cannot hardwire everything, every case scenario in the program. Then comes, okay, sorry. I'll just talk about the problems that if we are to make the detection systems, if we are just a moment, I'll just uh, okay. So the examples that I previously showed in these, I am again showing them again to let you know what are the problems if I try to solve them with knowledge based approaches. So, for example, the COVID-19 detection system, the decision made by the algorithms are based on hardware rules. So we have to encode thousands or even millions of if else rules. For example, there are a lot of communities. Each patient has are from different age group. Each patient has a different family history. So we cannot write all that knowledge in if else statement and make our computer decide whether the person has the disease or not. And another problem is that even the human expert may not be able to look beyond the apparent knowledge. By apparent knowledge, I mean that there might be some existing knowledge in all those patient record that I'm not able to figure out. So, in order to make sense of the hidden knowledge, because I have my own limitations, to make sense of those that hidden knowledge, and make the computer intelligent enough that it itself um, detect the patterns, I have to use something else. And even in the third example of image captioning system, we have a lot of cases that will not fit um, in our ideal scenario. Like for example, here a girl is carrying a board and she's about to go, but if we write the program using like a lot of rules, we would not be able to incorporate or include everything, and our program will not be robust to different cases. Then we have the second wave of artificial intelligence based systems, that is machine learning based systems. So, for example, this is the picture that is shown in Excel. It's not um, it's just for the demonstration purpose. For example, you have different patients and you have their different attributes and you have their different diagnoses in the K column. So uh, instead of a human writing all those uh, knowledge, all those cases in if else statement and feeding that to the computer, what you do is you simply you use an algorithm that simply takes the input and output pair, and it decides itself whether the patient has a disease or not. So you are not writing any sort of um, rule or something. So the difference between this and the knowledge-based AI is that of the mapping function. The mapping function that machine learning systems, that intelligent machine learning systems use, they themselves figure out how to map the input to the output instead of a human instead of a human telling in sort of if-else statements. And then those mapping functions, you can simply call them machine learning algorithms. And they can be for in traditional machine learning, it can be like logistic regression or SVM or KNN or neural network. So how does a machine learning algorithms do this mapping if we are not hardwiring the knowledge? So what they do is you train the machine learning algorithm by providing the data and the outputs. The resultant mapping is known as um, you can call it as a trained model. And at deployment time, for example, if you are to create a COVID-19 detection system, you can take any classifier, for example SVM, and feed it with the features that are coming from the patient record. And then when you are going to deploy it at any clinic, it is going to automatically detect whether the patient has this disease or not. So performance of machine learning algorithms, they rely on the extracted features or representation of data. So the other thing that these machine learning algorithms face is that, so the first type of approaches we looked were knowledge based approaches for artificial intelligence. The second type of approaches are machine learning based systems, but they are intelligent because they can map the input to the output themselves. So, but these approaches also have an issue, and the issue is that the person himself has to tell the algorithm what kind of features you have to use, or the person has to extract the features in advance. So, for example, uh, I have worked previously and still on different medical image data. So you can think of um, taking this example. If I were to extract different features, I'll simply take the image, take all its pixel and its mean values of all the pixels, standard deviation of all the pixels, and then I feed it to the machine learning algorithm, and I label the image with the sort of image caption. So this is the problem with these type of approaches is that they need the person has to extract the features because still the algorithm is the intelligent enough to map the input to the output, but we have to provide the features ourselves. And the second problem is that we don't know which features or representations are best to extract. Some features that might look best or might look good to us may not be the best for the computer to detect or to do a good mapping. So these were the issues that the traditional machine learning algorithms were facing. Uh, One is we have to extract the features ourselves, and the second is we don't know which features are best. Then comes the third wave of artificial intelligence, that is deep learning based AI. So the deep learning based AI solves the problem of traditional machine learning algorithms, and this by extracting the features themselves. So they basically learn the feature and as well as the mapping. So as you have seen in the in these type of machine learning based AI, it is the machine learning algorithm is learning the mapping, that is mapping the input to the output, but it's not learning the features. But the deep learning based AI, uh, the good point or the advantage is that it takes care of learning the features as well. So the deep learning based systems, either it is convolutional neural networks, either it is LSTM based system, either it is any other system for analyzing for any other data, it will take care or it will sort of guarantee that it will learn the feature itself. So it's sort of learning two sort of functions. One is the mapping function, that is mapping the input to the output, and that is other is the learning feature learning. So instead of a human um, um, extracting the features and feeding them to the network, it learns the features itself. For example, in previously I showed you an example where we have to extract different features from a cup or a bottle, and then we have to write if-else statements. But here, uh, we just have to give the picture to the algorithm. It will learn the feature itself, and it will map those features to the output itself. So two functions are it learns sort of multiple functions. Uh, and another uh, another sort of strong point of deep learning based systems is that it learns the latent representation that humans sort of are unable to see, because it is extracting or it is learning the features from the data itself. So it is automatically sort of learning the features that can best provide you the desired output. And application-based mechanisms, since deep learning is a sort of a broad category that itself has a lot of mechanisms for different applications. So convolutional neural networks are sort of mechanisms or algorithms that operate on image data. Recurrent neural networks are sort of algorithms that operate on time series data. Autoencoders and deep belief networks, these are algorithms that can process the data in an unsupervised fashion. I have not included the detail of unsupervised learning in this presentation, which I may think to include in the next one, but I think I'll more concentrate on the supervised learning and the regression-based applications. Some of the I have seen people doing regression-based with the CNNs, but using like 1D convolutions, but that is not a common case. So the first breakthrough of any deep learning model was through convolutional neural networks, and the application was image recognition. So the convolutional neural networks that came in 2012, in fact, before that, in 2008 and 2006, because convolutional neural networks are being around from even from 1983, like, but it took researchers a while to properly sort of refine them. So the first paper that came that has a very polished sense of convolutional neural networks was in 1998, and then the researchers started working on it. But the breakthrough came in 2012, and the reason for that breakthrough was before 2012, the GPUs did not have a very high power, and there are some problems with training the deep learning models. So this architecture, which I'm not going to discuss in this presentation, that came in 2012, but I'm just giving a very brief sort of introduction. The architecture that came in 2012, that sort of combined a lot of tricks that were already existing but not combined before, and thus the researchers were able to train the model very well. So all in all the deep learning models, whether they are working on any image, whether they are working on any time series data, whether they are doing any unsupervised learning, they learn multiple functions. That is why they are called deep neural networks, because they are composition of multiple functions. Unlike the traditional machine learning algorithms, you cannot call traditional machine learning algorithms as like non-deep or something, but they lack this capability of extracting the features themselves. The practical applications based on CNNs. So today I was reading about Airbnb, that uses the photo labeling system in Airbnb, uses deep neural networks to categorize different photos which users upload. So the users, when they give the advertisement of their house on Airbnb, the labels of those photos are sometimes incorrect, and it's sometimes without caption, or it sometimes don't have any labels at all. And the system that has been embedded or deployed at their station, it automatically generates the labels for the images. So the customers, or so the visitors that visit Airbnb can in advance see the pictures and see, okay, this is the living room and all that. So coming to the tools for machine learning and deep learning, and just one more comment, I have not included any specific application of CNNs, because in this presentation I just want to give a very brief overview, like from where it has started and why do we need deep learning, because its motivation for deep learning systems, it's different for different applications. So if I start talking about the CNNs for image based applications, it might be a bit confusing uh, in the later series. So the tools for machine learning and deep learning, machine learning tools, the most popular tool that is based on Python. So I'm not including um, MATLAB or other things at this time. Um, Python-based machine learning packages scikit-learn, TensorFlow, and PyTorch. But if you are going to do some traditional machine learning, for example, simple standard classifiers, SVM, or logistic regression, or linear regression, so you may use the scikit-learn packages. Otherwise, if you are going to work on some large-scale image data, it's better to use TensorFlow and PyTorch. And secondly, scikit-learn does not support running on multiple processor or any GPU support. Coming to the TensorFlow, so TensorFlow is a low-level library through which you can build and deploy large-scale machine learning models. The key feature of TensorFlow is it basically constructs the graph. Um, the TensorFlow version 1, in TensorFlow version 1, because 2 has came recently, but just let's talk about the one right now. Um, so when I say its main feature is it um, builds the graph first before executing any kind of operation or something. It means that, for example, you have a very small equation or a very small program. You just want to add, for example, two numbers. Here it is a small demonstration of what I mean by graph execution. So it has been done on Google Colab. I'll talk about Google Colab later. So you simply take two variables and you assign different values to it, and then you simply add the two values. So tf.add is a simple command, like much like you do np.add in NumPy or Python. And when you try to see the value of the C, you can see here. It just ignore the first line. It is not relevant to your. It is not relevant to you. You can see it gives you the answer tensor add 0, and it doesn't give you the answer, but it has given you the node of this variable. So the way it works is that before it performs any computation, it makes the graph, and the node in your graph, they represent your variables. And once it has made the graph, you have to execute the graph using another command. So when you execute the defined graph using a proper using by initializing a session, it basically places your graph onto the GPUs or CPUs. So before that, it does not does anything before you allocated a session. So by graph execution, I mean is that if you want to simply add two numbers, or if you want to simply give the model or the algorithm your input and you want the output, it will not do it dynamically, but it first builds the graph where it allocate each node. It represent the variables with the node, and the edges, they represent the operations and the results, and then it is executed. The second thing, the second way to of how the TensorFlow behaves is eager execution. So because graph execution was a bit of a difficult for the beginners, so TensorFlow also uh, included another mod that is called eager execution. And this is by default enabled in TensorFlow version 2, but it is not enabled in TensorFlow version 1, because I had been using TensorFlow version 1 for my research work uh, because of some incompatibilities that come in TensorFlow version 2. So I have not ever used eager execution. But the difference between eager execution and the graph execution is that, for example, if you take the same lines and you initialize two variables with two different values and you try to see their sum, you can see it immediately gives you the answer that it is a TensorFlow tensor that's value is 5, and shape, because it is just a one-dimensional tensor, so that is why it has given you a blank round bracket. But here you can see it gives you the output, the name of the output node, not the actual output. You have to run the session, initialize the session, and then run it to get the output. This is the graph execution, and this is the eager execution. And coming to the PyTorch, PyTorch, unlike TensorFlow, uses dynamic graph. So by dynamic graph, I mean is that it's just, you can think of as just like NumPy, where you initialize different variables with the values, and then you simply like whatever operation you want to perform, you do it. So this is an example using PyTorch. And just for the record, whenever you want to start using TensorFlow or PyTorch, you have to first import the package. And for example, here you are importing import TensorFlow as TF, and here you are importing import torch. Um, then so you initialize a and b variables with tensors, one-dimensional tensors, as 3 and 2 values, but you have to write, like explicitly mention that these 3 and 2 are torch tensors. Otherwise, it won't be able to figure out that, like if you simply like write a is equal to 3 or b is equal to 2, it won't be able to figure out whether these are tensors. So if you here, if you see the value, it simply calculates their sum and immediately gives you the output tensor 5, unlike TensorFlow. And someone might be thinking that eager execution is a good option because it immediately gives you value, but there are a lot of other things that graph execution takes care of that I'm not going to discuss right now, that graph execution automatically take care of, which you have to do by yourself in eager execution. So if you are doing very basic simulations, then eager execution is okay. If you are just checking the sort of compatibility, or if there is no bug in the model, then it's okay. But if you are going to train your model for a um, for a while, for a lot of epochs, then you have to use graph execution. And this is a summary which I have just discussed: evolution of artificial intelligence, motivation for deep learning, and overview of frameworks for deep learning. So the next plan is first I'll show a very working example of deep neural networks for image recognition, that and then deep convolution neural networks in the next session, and then text generation using LSTM, and then time series data analysis, and finally generative models for detecting adversaries. So I'll be doing all these things using Google Colab. So if you guys have a working computer, you guys can definitely do that. That's it.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I just have few basic questions. Uh,
Yeah, sure.
let's say if someone wants to learn about deep learning, is it good to start directly with deep learning, or he should learn about machine learning and some knowledge-based AIs, and then move on forward to deep learning?
No, it's not necessary. He should know how neural networks work, but knowledge about the knowledge-based AI or the traditional machine learning algorithms is not at all necessary.
Okay, so if someone wants to start using deep learning in his research, then he should directly move to deep learning by just getting some basic knowledge about machine learning. Like instead of
Of
using some, or you can say training the models of machine learning and then moving on to deep learning, so it's not compulsory.
No, it's not compulsory, but he should have a knowledge of Python, because both your TensorFlow and your PyTorch, if you look at their source code, like very basic source code, very low level source code, they're all written in Python. So Python and object, I think OOP is very important for you getting started. You should know Python and you should know object oriented programming, and everything rest is okay. If you have basic concept of how neural networks work, deep neural networks work, and you can do that on TensorFlow and PyTorch, then it is okay.
And since we'll be doing it on Google Colab as you mentioned, so there'll be no requirement of minimum PC requirement for the training or anything like that.
No, there should be no requirement because it doesn't require any configuration. It's all on cloud. But sometimes some people have some issues with Google Colab. So it's better that before the presentation or before we start, you are sure that, okay, the Google Colab is working. Just try to make sure with a few examples from Python or from TensorFlow, or even the code, the small code that I have written in the slides. If your Google Colab is running that code, then it's okay.
I'm sorry, that would be a bit childish question. Like, can
No, no,
we
it's okay.
even
Just
can we even do our research work on Google Colab? Because I'm totally new to AI, so if that's the case, then why the students normally go for getting higher specific computers instead of just doing it on Google Colab?
what do you mean by your research? Like,
Like
can you
if I
clarify?
want to train a model of my, like, let's say medical imaging or anything like that, and I want to do it for the purpose of my research, the
Hmm.
normal trend is that I should go buy a good laptop or buy a good computer having graphic card and all that. Can all
Hmm.
these things be done on Google Colab?
Well, it is good for if you are starting, if you are just running some examples, but
Mm.
it might not give you a very good speed because you are using a hardware that is not on your computer, that is on sort of a server. So if you are going to train your model for a long time or something, then it's not okay. But it's good for just for beginners.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. If anyone have got any other questions, we can discuss. Thank you.